Well, welcome back, everybody. It's nice to see everyone looking so refreshed and rested, and I'm glad to see you all here this morning. I'm hoping that we're all going to learn a little more on teaching and interacting with our students experiencing autism. Last summer, while Googling autism at the post-secondary level, I came across a paper entitled A Heuristic on Best Practices in Working with Students at the Post-Secondary College or University Level Experiencing Autism Spectrum Disorder, an Investigation, a Guide. It was 116 pages long, but I printed it anyway, and I have never regretted it. As you can see, it has been well tabbed and well used. It was a wealth of information. And as every student that experiences autism is different from every other student with autism, I was able to take notes from here and make fact sheets on specific students to share with the instructors. So this book has been a great resource. Who wrote this resource? Kevin Reinhardt. So you ask, who is Kevin Reinhardt? Okay. Kevin is registered with the College of Psychologists of Ontario and with the Newfoundland and Labrador Psychology Board. He has extensive experience in assessment, teaching, and supportive counseling of students and families who experience disabilities. He has trained and worked in disability and education since 1974. Kevin has spent the last 27 years in post-secondary services. He's written and presented nationally and internationally to students, parents, educators, psychologists, medical personnel, rehab specialists, business, and government on issues related to education and disability. He's been on the faculty of Georgian, Seneca, and Cambrian colleges, where he has worked in teaching, counseling, program development, psychoeducational, psychovocational assessment, research, learning strategies, assistive technology, e-counseling, and mentoring. He's had opportunity to take the sabbatical off to write the paper that I previously mentioned. In addition, Kevin is also the parent of a young adult who experiences ASD and is attending post-secondary in Ontario. While his interests are many, they include transition to post-secondary supports, transition to work, and assessment of ASD in older teens and in adults. He's recently retired from Seneca College and is currently an associate with the Redpath Centre in Toronto, where he conducts his private practice in psychology. He continues to write and present nationally and internationally to all of us on issues related to education and disability, especially autism spectrum disorder. And in 2014, he was the recipient of the Ontario Colleges Award of Excellence in Counseling. So it's my pleasure now to welcome Kevin Reinhardt to us, and let's learn a little. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You forget about these things. Hearing them recounted like that is almost overwhelming. I feel for you all. You're back. This year, I'm not back. It's retired in June 30th. So it's a whole different experience for me. But it does give me the opportunity to do something that I'm really excited to keep doing, and that is to keep out there in the community, helping to get the message across about what we can do to make this a successful experience for students who experience autistic spectrum disorder. And that's what we're going to try and look at today as much as we can. It's going to be a little bit experiential, and I will apologize in advance. Some of the things that we're going to do are going to make you feel stressed. That's because you can't understand the experience of the students unless you have some tiny little experience of how they're living it. Now, we're not going to leave you stressed. We're going to let you then find out, well, what can I do as an instructor to make this a successful experience? So first, a little bit of what's it like, and then what can we do about it? So that's the plan for today. What's running here, these are some of the most wonderful artists that have put together some comics that I've just sort of, collected, stolen over the years, and, I let them run while people are getting seated. Usually, it's not usually, part of the presentation. In fact, it's not part of the presentation, but it could be the entire presentation. These folks are so talented, and they've made such great comments and observations on autism and the associated kinds of difficulties people with autism may experience, that you could make an entire presentation just from these. And I would encourage you to seek out any of them and look at their work, because it's good. And someone yesterday said, "That's me. That's my cape." So let's stop that for now, and we'll go into the actual presentation, which, as you can see, is students with ASD how to try harder and, well, still fail, because they do try very hard and they fail. But we're going to try and make that and not fail. That's the point of all this. Some administrators have said to me, well, what's the point of putting these services in place? And I said, well, you're right. If you don't put the services in place, you won't have to worry about these students. About 2 weeks, they'll be gone. So there, you've saved having to put the services in place, because they're going to be out of here. And I don't think that's what we want. We want our students to be successful. A gentleman yesterday was telling me that I think it was over 90% of his students are successful. That's, in my world, that's remarkable. There are very few colleges that can claim that kind of success rate. So if you guys are doing that kind of work, you're already doing absolutely stellar work in success for your students. You can see, yes, I work now private practice at the Redpath Centre. That's sort of a coming together of like-minded individuals under another Kevin. There are two of us there. We are all working with individuals who experience autism. So what I would be seeing there, and I alluded to this earlier when I was talking to one of your local CBC gentlemen. They did an interview this morning. I'm seeing lawyers, I'm seeing educators at all levels, university, college, high school, elementary school, and I'm listing these in order of numbers. So mostly I see lawyers, mostly after that educators, and then we're talking financial services, stockbrokers, traders, things like that. And then your stereotypical, at least in my experience, your engineers, your computer people. So the people you think might experience autism are not the people who are necessarily identifying with autism. It cuts across all races. The rate in Korea for the incidence of autism is probably one of the highest there is. It cuts across all ethnic and racial, political boundaries. It's everywhere. And again, your gentleman this morning on CBC asked, well, is it growing? Are you seeing more at NBCC? And the response from your NBCC person was, it seems to be about steady in terms of actual numbers that you guys are seeing. And you'll see as the slides go on, that's not something I can say for the experience elsewhere. It's hugely growing. Now, why? Not necessarily because, and your NBCC spokesperson made that point, not because there's necessarily more people getting autism, quote unquote, but we are recognizing and being able to take those individuals who may have been moved to the periphery years by and bring them into the mainstream. And that's why they're coming to your classrooms, because they want to be part of the world around them. It's no longer okay for them to just sit home and, maybe go fishing or logging, with their uncle, that kind of thing. They've got to get a career. They've got to get a job. They've got to get out there and do something. They may not be able to live at home. We're pretty mobile group of people these days. You know, we don't all necessarily live in our, you know, grandparents and parents and, you know, grandchildren all together anymore. So they are out there. You're going to be seeing them. You're going to be having them in your classrooms, and they are different. And that's what we're going to start talking about. How is it they are different? I think I started to say this. You're going to be a little uncomfortable, and I apologize in advance. And another thing I want to say very clearly, I will make sweeping generalizations. It's hard to stand up here and qualify everything I said. If I had to qualify everything I said, we wouldn't get past the first few slides. So take it as a given. I don't mean this to apply to everybody. It's not applying to everybody. But it is indicative of certain individuals you may encounter, and probably the individuals who are having problems. Because there's a whole lot of people out there who are in your classes, who are working beside you as faculty, and they have autism. You just don't know it. So I apologize if any of this is hurtful language for anyone. It's not meant to be that. It's only meant to be indicative of certain problem situations. So, autism, Asperger's, PDD, NOS. This is going to be very familiar for anyone who was here yesterday. It was yesterday. What are they? Well, right now, under the current DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, it's produced by the American Psychiatric Association. All kinds of people from all over North America and a little bit from other continents as well got together, and they released this new manual, which is supposed to help codify, you know, what is it we're talking about when we're talking about these disabilities in mental health. There are issues around whether or not people agree with the current version, but it's one of the versions we have. There are other ways of looking at codifying these things, but this is the one that has really caught on in North America. Earlier this year, I was at a training. I was getting trained in Cambridge in England, and you know, it was sort of like, well, yeah, that's the DSM-5, you know, but we like this instead, you know, so not everybody is necessarily sticking to that directly. In fact, you know, you'll regularly see items from the National Institute of Mental Health in the US where they're talking about, well, you know, the DSM, it doesn't get to the biological basis of behavior and illness and conditions and syndromes, so how valid is it? It's what we use. You know, I use the example of eyeglasses. You could be blind. Well, what does that mean? Well, you know, you're legally blind. You ever hear that expression? Somebody's legally blind. Well, what does that mean? We make things up. That's what we do. You know, we're going to put somebody in this little pigeonhole here, and that's what we're going to call them, and that's what they are. And it's a political, social construction. You know, not that long ago, the DSM identified people who were homosexual as mentally ill. That's what we believed. Some people still believe that, but be that as it may, you know, we don't say that anymore. That's not something that we agree with. Back around the turn of the century, from, you know, like maybe 1899, 1900, those of you who, you know, have that XX chromosome, it was considered that you really shouldn't stress yourself by trying to do academic pursuits, things like that, because your brains weren't big enough and they'd overheat, you know, and that was, you know, that was just a fact. You know, we knew that. You know, there's a lot of things we know that we don't know, but we come to these political, social understandings, and that's what we say it is. But don't get me wrong. When we say that somebody has a disability, this does not mean that it's just a little bit difficult for them. This means that they are severely impaired in their ability to, and you then add what those to what. But this isn't, you know, like if people will say, oh, everybody's got a disability. No. No, not everybody. I have trouble seeing if I take my glasses off, but I'm not legally blind because I can still see. I can navigate, I can do things. I'm impaired to a certain extent, but it's not like I cannot see. I have a hearing impairment. Am I, disabled? No. In fact, I can tell my clients who are having auditory hallucinations that I too hear things nobody else can hear. I have a constant ringing in my ears, a little bit different from what they're hearing and for different reasons, but it's not a disability. People have, minor issues, people have learning issues. I'm not talking about learning disability again. These are just difficulties that we all have and we all, deal with in one way or another. Disability is what we're talking about here when we're talking about autism. And we'll get into how disabling it can be. It's a developmental disability. I'm not going to go into the slides on this, just enough to say it just means you were born with it or it happened so close to that event that, we're not counting. So it's with you all your life, a developmental disability. And that's what autism is. You don't grow autism. I had an administrator say to me once when I mentioned to them I was doing assessments and I'd actually assessed a 71-year-old. And he said, "Oh, so is that like late onset autism?" And, it's one of those times when you kind of stop and say, what do I say to this person? But no, there is no such thing as late onset autism. By definition, it's a developmental disability. It's something that happens when you are before you're born, or as I said, so close to that event that we're not counting. The definition autos refers to self, and that's very much in classical autism, in so-called Kanner autism. The individual seems to be turned in on themselves. They don't seem to be responding to the outer world at all. So that's where we get the autos. First, really sort of identified, and you don't need this, Eugen Buehler, 1911, he started talking about this type of schizophrenia. That's how he was identifying it. Then we go on to Kanner, Leo Kanner, which is that classic or Kanner type of autism. Hans Asperger is kind of interesting because during the Second World War, he was discovering these young people who had this strange way of relating to other people. And he did some really good research, and then it was the Second World War. So guess what? He was in Germany. We didn't know about it. People didn't know about that until much, much later when it got translated into the English, and some of the Brits started talking about it. I think we're talking like the 60s by that time. So that's when we started referring to this Asperger's syndrome and what, these apparently intellectually intact individuals who had these strange ways of relating. There's always been this confusion all the way back to Buehler and the schizophrenia. Some of you may be old enough to remember childhood schizophrenia. Does that ring a bell for anybody? Do you also remember refrigerator mothers? Yeah. At that point, and this was like the early 60s, we blamed moms for autism. We said it's because you're cold and uncaring. That's why your children can't relate. And the term refrigerator mother was coined to refer. You can imagine the damage that did. We don't do that anymore. And again, that's those social political constructs. We think we know something, and then we find it wasn't really that way. Today, we now refer to the whole, he gave me a pointer, the whole stream of autism, Asperger's, PDD, NOS as ASD, Autistic Spectrum Disorder. Love it or dislike it a lot, that's the term you're going to hear, Autistic Spectrum Disorder. You'll also hear autism, and strangely enough, you'll also hear Asperger's and PDD-NOS. Well, how can that be if we no longer use those terms? because they decided when they changed the DSM back in 2013, May, that you could keep your old diagnosis if you had been diagnosed as having Asperger's or PDD-NOS, but going forward, people would be using just autism or autistic spectrum disorder. I think there are some difficulties with that. We won't bother going into that. The main message for you is don't be confused by the label. It's the same kid, has the same problems, and that's what we have to figure out, how we can accommodate, not modify, but accommodate so that kid can be successful in your classes. Are we going to see them? You bet. Why? Well, let's look at one of these posters and hope it actually works. Yes, it works. This is from an autism awareness campaign. I really encourage you. April is Autism Awareness Month. April 2nd is Autism Awareness World Autism Awareness Day. Get out there in your campuses. Yesterday, somebody came up with a really good idea of bring your people in from your placements and educate them as well. So I heartily encourage this autism awareness activity. And this is a poster from one of those autism awareness days. Keep calm, and if you don't know anybody with autism, ASD, don't worry. And those are some of the statistics on this. I don't know if you can read those in the color. This was for a campaign called Light It Up Blue. That's why everything's in blue. In 2000, the National Institute of Health estimates autism affects 1 in 500 children. In 2001, they changed that to 1 in 250. In 2007, the Centers for Disease Control report autism affects 1 in 150 children. In 2010, the Centers for Disease Control report 1 in 110. 2012, 1 in 88. And there even has been a report since then of 1 in 55 in 2013. There was a study done in southwestern Ontario where they pretty much came up with, again, I think it was 1 in 58 in southwestern Ontario. And now, people aren't making these up. These are children who have been diagnosed with autism. The CDC, their methodology involves taking 8-year-olds and accessing from doctors the medical records for 8-year-olds in terms of incidents that's being reported. So they get a new cohort of 8-year-olds every year, and they ask doctors, tell us what's going on. And that's how they do their epidemiology stats. They may do a lot more than that, but that's the part I know about. And so they're not making it up. It's what's out there. It's what's happening. It's what's being identified. And as Mary Ellen, I think, noted earlier, was it Mary Ellen or somebody else? I can't remember. It might have been your lady on the interview this morning. But we're getting better at identifying them. They aren't being pushed out to the periphery. Yesterday I used the example of a young man who was in my grade 2 class in a little school in Nova Scotia. And he was 16 years old. He was in my grade 2 class because he didn't function very well. But man, he could build boats. And I don't mean little, we were stealing, steaks from the highway people and, because they were already shaped like this, and we made boats out of those. But he built real boats. And, he was working on Cape Islanders, things like that. But he couldn't read and write. And they've been with us for a long time, but we just kind of pushed them away, or they were just so good that they prevailed regardless of the conditions. So you've got your Turing. For those of you who are in computers, that's a name you know. You've got Einstein. Everybody knows Einstein. You've got who have you got? Let's look. We'll go back here and see if I can start things up again. Oops, no, that didn't work. Let's just see a list of, get to know somebody with autism. Well, how about these somebodies? Now, arguably, not all of these people have been diagnosed, but it seems to be consistent with the characteristics displayed. Bill Gates, Albert Einstein, Sir Isaac Newton, Mark Twain, Wolfgang Mozart, Thomas Edison, Vincent van Gogh, Emily Dickinson, Henry Bond, Glenn Gould, Alan Turing, Thomas Jefferson, I can't read that, I'm going to trip over that. Anyway, Pip Brown, AKA Lady Hawk from Indie Rock, and so on, and so on, and so on. Champion surfers, writers, musicians, artists, across the board. So they do succeed in spite of us, but not everybody's a superstar. And you're going to be getting a lot of just folks who also have autism. And they want to be successful in your classes. So that's who you're going to be seeing. So let's go back to, well, I didn't do it again. I need 2 hands for this, obviously. Now, are the numbers growing? Well, take a look at this. Whoops. Let's go back and look at that. This is a chart that shows the 2011 numbers in red and the 2009 numbers in blue for enrollment of students who only identify with autism in the colleges in Ontario. Take a look at Algonquin in Ottawa. That's 2009, that's 2011. They're coming. If your numbers aren't increasing, they will. That's in part because the elementary and secondary school systems are getting so much better at allowing these kids to make it through. You're no longer getting Gary, my grade 2 classmate, being stuck in grade 6 forever, or stuck in grade 2 forever at age 16. You know. They're putting in the supports that are allowing these kids to be successful. We had a mom in our session yesterday who was saying, it's a lot better now than it used to be. It's not easy, there are still battles, but these kids are getting what they need to be successful. So they are coming, and there will be increasing numbers of them just by virtue of the fact that they're out there and they're making it through successfully through high school. So you're going to be seeing them in increasing numbers. So, whoops. So what is this thing we call autism? Well, I like to start with what isn't it? And it isn't the Rain Man. And a lot of you must remember Dustin Hoffman as the Rain Man. But unfortunately, although most of us had that as one of our first sort of public experiences of autism, that's not autism. The gentleman who that was largely modeled on has a disorder that I think it's called FNG. Unfortunately, and I thank you so much for providing these beautiful color slides, but they aren't the notes, they're the slides. So I don't have my notes, so I can't remember the name of that disorder. In any case, that's not autism. So here's just a little clip from, you know what? No, we're not going to do it. It's a clip from the movie, but you don't need it. We'll just say it's not autism. But this one I do like, and I want to play it for you, because autism is also not psychosis. Now, someone will say, but they do such strange things, and they react so strangely to stimulus in their environment, and you know, they have these like little meltdowns over stuff that's happening, and nobody else sees what's wrong there. Yep, that can happen, but it's not psychosis, because psychosis is something very different. And we're going to try and play this, and it's probably going to go horribly wrong because we've had real technical problems getting this to work. So hold your breath, guys. We'll see what happens here. I'm supposed to do something here, but oh, what do you know?
Hello, I'm a badger, and I'm here to talk to you about psychosis. The first thing to tell you about psychosis is, well, it's nothing like a badger. In fact, if it were in stress, my friends. Now, badgers, we hate stress. We prefer to sleep. Eat some worms. Have a little poo afterwards. Psychosis, on the other hand, is nothing like a badger. He loves this stuff. A little stress, your mind can contain it. Too much though, and that stress is going to spill. Now, badgers, us European varieties at least, are black and white. Psychosis, on the other hand, is nothing like a badger. It's a grey illness, a spectrum of symptoms that a sufferer may or may not experience. Delusions, for example, are false, often persecutory beliefs governed by paranoia. Examples of this might be that foxes are after them, that worms don't taste amazing, or that psychosis is exactly like a badger. Hallucinations, on the other hand, are sensory distortions. The sufferer may hear, smell, feel, or see something that isn't really there. Hello, could you tell me the way to the office party, please? No. Why not? Is it not real? Oh yeah. Now I want you to imagine two people on either side of you, talking in your ears. Then, once you've done that, picture holding a conversation with a third person. Pretty tricky, right? Psychosis sufferers can find conversation and everyday activities hard to commit to because of the distress caused by their other symptoms. This is known as disorganised speech and disorganised action. Now, badgers, when confronted, can bite. We can even lock our jaws. Psychosis, on the other hand, is nothing like a badger and tends to let go after a while. Sufferers can get help, and unlike a badger, its jaws won't lock. Medication and therapy can lead to a permanent recovery. So if you're worried about someone and see these signs we've been talking about, please talk to them. But for now, always remember, psychosis ain't nothing like me.
Okay. So, and ASD is nothing like psychosis. Although individuals experiencing ASD have tremendous anxiety, they respond to stimulus in their environment in ways that we may find very difficult to understand. They have difficulty with communication, but it's not disorganized speech. So there are similarities that result in me being called to these meetings where we think so and so is having psychosis, and then when we review the situation, it's like, well, no, really, what we're probably looking at here is somebody who's experiencing ASD. I mean, the fact that they stand this close to you when they talk, maybe has more to do with they don't have any conception of their body in space than it has to do with some kind of, psychotic misunderstanding. And the fact that they can't stand the sound of, we don't have any fans in here, but we do have an air conditioning system running, that may be overwhelming, oppressive for someone with ASD. But it's not because it's the sound of giant insects, ready to, attack us or something like that. So there are real distinctions you have to make there. It's not psychosis. Unfortunately, that also means you can't treat it with drugs. It's not, something that is going to go away. It's something that requires ongoing support. And, as most people who have high-functioning autism would say to you, I'm kind of happy being the way I am, thank you. I don't necessarily want a pill or something that's going to change me. And that's great. There are others on the spectrum who would, in a second, they would take that pill because they're having so much difficulty functioning. But, everybody's different. Okay, so let's see if we can get back to our slides. This runs so much more smoothly when the technology cooperates. And one more that I think you need to know is people with autism, by definition, have extreme interests and repetitive behaviors. People say, well, that's OCD, right? You know, obsessive compulsive disorder. You know, that's you know, everybody's seen, you know, penny, penny, penny. But that's not necessarily OCD. The person with autism may have these behaviors as self-soothing, stimulating, stress-reducing behaviors. They don't think anything like this. And with apologies to anyone who experiences OCD, but that's OCD. And it's a terrible condition, very difficult to deal with. And people feel like something horrible is going to happen unless they do something. You know, people with OCD are saving the world for us every day. So keep that in mind. ASD is different, and how it's different, you know, there are people with ASD who do not like this show, but I find some of the stuff they do just, although they do it in a comedic way, it's just so right on for so many aspects of ASD. And so let's take a look at how ASD is different.
In a few minutes, when I gloat over the failure of this enterprise, how would you prefer I do it? The standard I told you so? With a classic neener, or just my normal look of haughty derision? You don't know what you're on yet. Haughty derision it is.
Excuse me? I'm Amy Farrah Fowler, you're Shelton Cooper.
Hello, Amy Farrah Fowler. I'm sorry to inform you that you've been taken in by unsupportable mathematics designed to prey on the gullible and the lonely. Additionally, I'm being blackmailed with a hidden dirty sock.
If that was slang, I'm unfamiliar with it. If it was literal, I share your aversion to soil hosiery. In any case, I'm here because my mother and I have agreed that I will date at least once a year.
Interesting. My mother and I have the same agreement about church.
I don't object to the concept of a deity, but I'm baffled by the notion of one that takes attendance.
Now then, you might want to avoid East Texas.
Noted. Now, before this goes any further, you should know that all forms of physical contact up to and including coitus are off the table.
May I buy you a beverage?
Tepid water, please.
Good God, what have we done?
Okay. ASD is different. You could do a whole course on ASD just from a couple of clips from the show. It's really, I think, quite well done. But as I said, a lot of folks on the spectrum are not happy with it. They feel it doesn't present them in the best light. So why do we have to do this? Why do we have to accommodate these students? And again, I'm not saying modify, I'm saying accommodate. You guys, one gentleman yesterday said, I've got that underneath the blotter on my desk. This is your guideline from the New Brunswick government on how to deal with students who have disability. And you might want to get one under your desk too, or your blotter under the desk. I don't know if that's a good idea. So it's the law. It's the right thing to do. It's, nice. It's all of those things. And that, and, what, 50 cents will get you a phone call these days, maybe? But this was for the administrators yesterday, and I haven't altered the slide. Maybe you want to be the administrator who does say that, well, the next, Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or whomever, they came from our institution. We graduated them. They did their program here. Or you could be the administrator who says, no, we failed them out. There's some real advantage to encouraging these thinkers, because for however much you want to say they're just folks, they are different and they think differently, and they are very much many of the innovators and the people who drive that invention in our society. Work harder than anybody else when they work on something. Intense interests, 24 hours a day. They can be intensely interested in working on something. Unfortunately, it may not be your subject. That's the problem. But they really are the future in many ways. I don't know if you noticed one of those slides, it shows the little thing crawling out of the primordial mud, and then as it progresses, it starts to stand up and have legs and becomes human, and then the last one is an Aspie, we're the next generation, the next evolution. There are some people on the spectrum who somewhat facetiously say that, but only somewhat, I think. I really kind of feel it could be part of it. The other very self-serving aspect of this, aside from wanting to have the next, Bill Gates come from your institution, is we like, presumably, you're back, you like your jobs, you like to, have a college here, and it takes money to do that. And governments are always going, who's going to get this part of the pie? And if we have to put a whole lot of money into social services, if we have to put a whole lot of money into corrections, into hospitals, it's not going to education. If we provide the services for these students so they are successful, they aren't going to end up in social services, in hospitals, and in correctional services. So it's kind of like, where do you want them to put the money? Do you want them to have money so that they can give it to the colleges and universities? Or do you want that money to go to social services, medicine, and corrections? Because that's unfortunately where a lot of folks who don't get the right services end up these days when they're not able to be successful in life. So kind of a self-serving aspect to it, but it's also the right thing to do. And it's also the law to do it, to provide accommodation, not modification. We'll get to that more. What are the issues that these students experience? As you so embarrassingly pointed out, that title of that sabbatical, it's a little long. I stole it from Einstein, so that's all credit where credit's due. I figure you can't steal anything better than stealing it from Einstein, so I did steal that title from Einstein. And I went around to places in North America, and I talked to students, I talked to administrators, I talked to frontline staff, I talked to instructors, I talked to parents, I talked to community people working with individuals with ASD, and people were really giving, really inviting, gave me great access, and I came up with the kind of difficulties that these students are experiencing in post-secondary, and in large part, that's all what that is about. And here's a list, which covers it pretty much. Students experiencing ASD have difficulty with communication, any and all aspects of communication. They have difficulty with social understanding, probable lag in social developmental level. What does that mean? Well, we'll get to that. Probable difficulty with theory of mind or context, we'll get to that. Probable executive function difficulties, again, we'll get to that. Visual, motor, visual spatial, I think you probably understand that. Stress, anxiety, depression, you're coming back, you probably understand that. Repetitive self-soothing behaviors, talked to that a little bit earlier. Difficulty with changes of routine and structure. This is one that a lot of people don't quite get because, you know, we come into our classroom and we say to the students, you know, that test we were going to have next week, we're moving it to, we're going to have on Friday, it's Wednesday, we're moving it to next week. And everybody's, hey, you know, except the kid with ASD, because now it's changed. And all the preparation they'd put in for that test coming up on Friday now has to be rethought and reworked, and their entire next week has to be changed so that they can integrate that into, and if they don't have a meltdown, they may just have a freeze where they're not able to even think about that course or anything else, and they fail that test next week. You know, it's not something we expect, that a change in routine like that, which we, you know, let's face it, we kind of think that's probably a nice thing for the students, that we've changed that for them. They have more time to study on this or more time to party and not study or whatever. That's going to cause that kind of a reaction, but that's the kind of reaction you can get from some students on the spectrum. They just cannot cope with those kind of changes without a whole lot of preparation. So difficulties with change of routine and structure. Think about them coming from high school to your institution. That's a huge change, absolute, you know, change in worlds, and they have great difficulty dealing with that. Sensory issues. That's anything we take in through touch, through our ears, through our eyes. Those are all these sensory issues, gustatory, olfactory, all sensory issues where they can have massive difficulty dealing with those things. We'll talk a little more about that as well. Somatic difficulties, especially gastrointestinal difficulties. There are a number of studies out that are showing that individuals who experience autism have hugely greater difficulty with these constant gastrointestinal issues. So in other words, put it bluntly, the kid is sitting in front of you, you're trying to teach whatever it is you're teaching, and they've got a stomach ache. You know, it's as simple as that. And it doesn't go away. They just, this is constant for them. So, you know, how well do you pay attention when you're sitting there and you're feeling all, you know, cramped up, and, you know, it's just, it's not easy to deal with. And this is a constant for some of these students. And processing difficulties, which we'll talk about more as we go on. Not that they are in any way, I want to make this clear, intellectually inadequate. Yes, there are individuals in this spectrum of autistic spectrum disorder who are developmentally handicapped, no question about it. But they're probably not the individuals you're seeing. They would probably not have made it through their high school program and come to you. Now, somebody talked about modified programs yesterday and kids coming in on some special. I can't speak to that, don't know how that works. You know, there is a lot of modification that goes on in the elementary and secondary panels, but you know, that's their mandate. Their mandate is to get kids through and to do whatever it takes to get them through. You've got a slightly different mandate in that you've got, in some cases, professional organizations. You have to, you know, meet their criteria, that kind of thing. You know, credentialing exams, those sort of things. But that doesn't remove the need for us to then look at what are the accommodations we can put in place to get that person to that level that they must get to. The simplest example, not my metaphor, yeah, but one a colleague came up with, there's a mountain, and to get to the top of that mountain, which is the criteria that must be met for this course, I'm not sure what the course is, but some people will climb hand over hand, you know, pitons, ropes, crampons, all that stuff. Somebody else takes a car up the mountain. That's their accommodation to get to the top, but they still get to the top. Somebody else flies up in a helicopter. It's not the how you get there, it's the being able to get there that is the important issue. So we have to look at the criteria in our programs and ask ourselves, first of all, is it bona fide? What do I mean by that? The example I used yesterday, a friend of mine, when we were kids, she wanted to work for CN as a porter. She was bilingual, they wanted bilingual, check. She was happy and healthy and liked working with people, check. But she was only like 4'9", something like that. So they said, you can't work here, because to work on the trains, you have to be this height, because you have to be able to reach these containers. This is where we keep stuff, nowhere else on the train to keep it, so you can't work here. That didn't sit well with her. They eventually came to the realization that, in fact, that's probably disadvantaging a whole class of people. Women are shorter, on average. And that's not a good thing to, disadvantage a class of people for no particularly good reason. Well, we have a good reason. They can't reach that bin. So you give them a stool. Then now they can reach the bin. So sometimes our criteria are not bona fide. We've set up things that don't really need to be, well, that one needed to be, so we accommodated it. A better example, I better use a better example. Many years ago, in a computing course, our instructors said, students must be able to do hexadecimal calculation in their heads. Anybody know what hexadecimal calculation? Yeah. And we had a student who had really, this was not ASD related, this was a learning disability with severe sequencing and organizing issues. And we wanted him to be able to use a calculator for this. And it was like, no, can't be done. So we went out to industry and we said, would you require your workers to do hexadecimal calculation in their heads? And the answer was, are you kidding? No, we require them to use calculators. We want them to get it right. We don't want them to be messing around and doing it in their heads. Is your criteria bona fide? Is it real? Or is it just the way we've always done it? You want to be asking yourself that all the time. Because there may be a different way, going around the mountain, flying up to the top of the mountain, providing the stool, or this is another one that, it may not be a bona fide requirement at all, like hexadecimal calculation in your head. Or how about this one? Students in wheelchairs who were not getting hired for positions in offices because they use tall filing cabinets. And if you're in a wheelchair, you can't reach, kind of like the lady on the train, can't reach the tall filing cabinets. The decision of the human rights was, so don't use the upper cabinets. So sometimes there's a way to do these things that you hadn't really thought about. You put in a couple of lower cabinets and you've replaced those upper cabinets and the person now can work. And governments like taxpayers. That's what they like. They like people to be happy, healthy, and employed, because then there's more money to give to other people when you're employed. They like taxpayers. So that's what they want us to accomplish. They want us to make taxpayers. Here's our first experiential exercise. Now, if you have hearing problems, I apologize, because, and that includes me, you may not be able to experience this. But for those of you who don't have hearing problems, listen closely, because there will be a test. Whoops. We need more volume. I'll probably blow your ears off now. Okay.
Touch the book with a pencil.
Everybody got that, right? No. This is really frustrating. It's not going to let me do it. I can tell. because when I get over here, it sees the icon underneath. Oh, wait a minute, look at that.
Touch the book with the pencil.
Now, we're stressing your working memory here, but did you hear the difference? What's the first person supposed to do? What were the instructions for the first time? Touch the book with the pencil. What were the instructions the second time? How's that different? What? Oh, inflection, yes, but what's the actual activity? Just for anybody who's not getting it, because I'm betting there are some people. No.
They want you to touch it, and then they want you to take the pencil.
So there's a book with a pencil. Touch the book with the pencil, or there was touch the book with the pencil. Okay? It was all a little bit of tone and pacing. Kids with ASD would not have a clue what the difference was. Now, you guys struggled with it. Presumably, you don't have ASD. They would not be able to understand that. It just, it's like, the 50-50 chance. They're not going to know one way or the other because they don't get pacing in language. Yes? Sir?
So I had no idea of the difference. And so what I would have done is tried to use a visual cue to help me understand. So would they have had challenges with that as well?
There's a lot of folks who think that everybody with ASD, and I'm not discounting this at all, have extra special visual abilities. You may have heard of Temple Grandin. She's a professor in, I think it's, I don't know what they call it, but animal husbandry, something like that, in Colorado. I think it's University of Colorado or University at Boulder, Colorado, something like that. Anyway, what she can do is she can look at a situation with cattle, and she can just then design the building that will be used to hold and process those animals. She just sees it. She just knows how and does it by seeing it. She's extremely ASD, she struggles with all kinds of things, but she has these superior visual spatial abilities. She thinks, and this is not scientific, she thinks that there are like 3 kinds of intelligence in ASD. There's a visual, there's a verbal, and there's a mathematical. That's just her opinion. Now, she has very strong opinions, and usually she has them pretty well backed up. And you may have noticed that for some of your students in your classes. They have very strong opinions, and they don't shake from those opinions very easily. Part of that is the difficulty with dealing with change. They've got hold of something. They know it. And then you're saying to them, well, not maybe in all instances. And it's very stressful for them to be then thinking, okay, there's another thing I don't have control of, and it's random chaos around me, and what am I going to do? So the other part of this may be, they may be right. And that's always hard to deal with when you're the professor, because they'll tell you. Nobody likes that very much. If this is their area of interest, they have probably done more reading and research in this than you can imagine. They may very well be right when they say, no, it's not like that. On the other hand, it may just be that this is something they learned, and it will be very difficult for them to unlearn it. There was an article recently about the dangers of knowing something in the classroom. And this was not for ASD, this was in general, that it's really difficult to unteach something that students think they know. You can do it, and they'll go, but they go back to their original belief. And for students with ASD, it is 10 times, 100 times that difficulty for them. Once they've established something, they have to hang on to it because life is chaos for them. and the things they know they need to know. So difficulties with tone, with pace, with volume. One young lady I worked with, when she was talking to you face to face, would talk like this. And you'd say, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. And she'd talk to you more at this rate and this volume. And it would drive everyone around her crazy that she couldn't seem to change her volume. So she thought, I got to do something about this. So she went into drama. And she can stand on that stage and she can project out to the audience just like nobody's business, but still, when you're talking to her face to face, so she's got like 2 speeds. She's been able to learn that, but that's all she's able to do. And it frustrates her to no end because, her family, her friends, they're all saying, what? Speak up. I can't hear you. Would you please? She's not trying to frustrate them. She just can't figure out where that other register is. Now, I have heard of some people who have used speech and language pathologists effectively to change their speech, people with ASD. So that's something that someone might want to consider if that's an issue. But getting back to your point, if someone has these kind of difficulties, write it down. Give them a visual. Try and get to them in a different kind of modality because quite clearly that verbal modality doesn't work well for them. So that's what you can do. Now, when do we, at the end of class, we say, all right, and now today we've finished with such and such, and next week I want you to do these chapters, these pages from each chapter, 12 through 13, 19 and 18, and then remember that we have that test coming up, and what's happening? Everybody's, getting their stuff together and running out the door. The kid with ASD doesn't know what happened, so they leave, and you say, as the parent, so, you got anything to do tonight? No. And they legitimately think there was nothing, because they heard nothing. It was just chaos and noise, and the best thing you can do is write it down. That's absolutely the gift you can give them, is write it down. Some people have, do you guys have a classroom system, online system? Which one is it? We don't know? She must be one of the newbies. It's a new system. Right space. Oh, okay. I'm not familiar with that one. My institution used Blackboard, and there's Moodle is, one of my sons is in a Moodle system. So there's all kinds of things out there. But if you use those kind of systems, do not assume that the student, first of all, understands how to use them. In going through this material, and I think it's been made clear, I've got a son who's in post-secondary in Ontario. And he looked at that particular item and he said, make them understand this, that even if there is this kind of a course management system, I don't necessarily understand it. And, I'll go on it and there'll be, statistics or something. Well, and that's where you're supposed to find your marks, but I don't know that. Statistics don't mean marks to me, or there's something else that, he said, I need to be told it, I need to be given instructions written on it, and then I need to have it done again, repeatedly, so that I understand it. And, he's a very bright young man, but, he said, I can't stress enough that college and university systems are just a mystery to the kid with ASD. They don't understand how to navigate our world here in post-secondary. And, they try, but it's like the kid who thought there was no homework. They legitimately don't know. They were supposed to sign up for the course. They thought once they paid their money, they were in the course. They don't know that, just because you've done the one assignment doesn't mean you finished all the assignments. That has to be pointed out to them. Although for us, it's like, well, of course you'd have to do the next one and the next one. But it didn't say that at the end of the first one. So, you know, it's that kind of lack of understanding of communication that can just kill them. And then they get embarrassed and they won't come to class. And as soon as that starts happening, they drop out. That's the end result. Or you get the call from the parent. Yeah. Body language. You know, okay, you guys are down here, so you're the victims of all this. You know, the kid with ASD will come up and talk to you like this, and you're trying to get as far back in the chair as you can, and that's reasonable, because they don't understand body language. They don't understand space. You know, I've watched individuals with ASD, you know, grow up, and I've watched them try and get into a car. And I emphasize the try, because you approach the door, and you open it, and you have to step away from it as you open it, and then you have to figure out where is the door frame, and where is my head, and which part of me do I move to put in first. And now, not everybody with ASD, but there are some individuals with ASD who have huge issues where is their body in space. And, you know, it's the same kid who runs down the hallway and you're going, why doesn't he fall down? Because everything's going in, you know, weird directions all at once. So difficulty with body and space, and no conception of body language. You know, that's somebody, you know, to emphasize something might go like that. Or, you know, that people use these kinds of things and make faces and things. It's not useful to them. The rules of conversation. I've used this with students, and it's worked pretty well with some of them. That you may have had this experience with students with ASD. You ask them a question, and they tell you everything they know. They just keep going and going and going. It's an information dump. That's what I call it. And they think it's a conversation. You know, you ask me what I know about, so I'm going to tell you everything I know about. So I've used the metaphor of a tennis match, and how if you want to have a nice long volley with somebody, you're not looking to win a point, you're just looking to have a nice friendly volley with someone, how you have to serve it in a way that they're able to respond to it, that they can see it coming and they get the idea of where it's going to be, and so they're paying attention to it. And, you know, in the process of understanding where it's going to hit and how hard it's coming, they're able to return it back to you, and then you have to pay attention to how they returned it, and, you know, how it's going to come to you and how fast it's going, so that then you can return it back to them. And that's what conversation is. You make a conversational volley, and, you know, they're looking at it and listening to it and understanding it, and then returning it back to you, and you have to listen and understand how they returned it back to you, because there may be all kinds of things about that return. Sorry, I'm not interested. That's really exciting. I'd like to talk more about that. All kinds of information that they have to figure out from this exchange. And it's never an information dump. So, rules of conversation. We do a whole program called the Peers Program, which, you know, if you guys can get this going in your region, in your institution, I'd highly, highly recommend it. But it's a program for teaching social and communication skills. And it's excellent. It's, you know, evidence-based. They've got lots of research behind it that shows it works. It results in kids who have zero interaction with other kids their age having like 1 or 2 get-togethers every week. You know, that's unbelievable. And it also, pardon me, results in kids who understand the rules of conversation. So when they're in your classrooms, they don't ask 50 questions in a 50-minute period. Now, you will have kids who do that. It happens. They haven't learned the rules of conversation. And you may need to work with them such that, and I've seen this work effectively, where they have like question cards and they can spend a card, maybe 2 cards in one period. That's it. You know, so after that, you've got a question, you put it in a single email, not 40, a single email, and you send it to the professor, and they may get back to you in 24 hours, but don't expect an instant response. So, you know, those are some of the kinds of rules you can set up when you encounter those kind of situations. Will they work for everybody? No, but they tend to work for most. Sarcasm, not, you know, understood, totally lost on the individual with ASD. Equally, they don't understand, and broad generalizations here, they don't understand lying. It's a concept that is foreign to them. They can lie, but generally speaking, they don't understand why someone would lie. So, you know, if they said, or if you said, "How do you like my scarf?" and they had an aversion to pink, they'd say, "I hate it." And expect you to be okay with that because you asked them. You know, they don't understand lies. There is, I mentioned this yesterday, it's now sort of a poignant kind of, it was before then. This young man had died in a car accident a few years ago, but he has on the web a survival guide for people with Asperger's. And in that, he talks about lying, and he talks about how, you know, you're not going to understand this, but he's talking to other people with Asperger's, but neurotypical people lie. They say things that aren't true, and they do it deliberately. It's not a mistake, you know, they do this deliberately. And sometimes they're white lies, and by that they say they don't mean them to be hurtful. But sometimes they're not, and they're meant to be hurtful. And you won't know the difference. And, you know, so that's the kind of processing you may be dealing with. And that's why social interaction can be so horrific for them, because they don't know. You know, I heard awful examples of things when I was doing my sabbatical where, you know, individuals were told that they had to exchange, you know, money or possessions or sexual favors for friendship. And that was what they thought was what they were supposed to do. If you have friends, you know, that's what you do. Because they don't understand these rules of socialization. And so I very heavily endorse the peers program. All right, social interactions, what's it feel like? So I've got my little pointer here, so we're going to pick on you this time. So what's that guy feeling? Pain. Does everybody agree with that? Do you all think that this guy's in pain? Well, he's not happy. Now she's waffling. Pain, not happy. What, are there other ideas? Embarrassment. Anybody else? Sorry? Confusion? It's not easy, is it? I mean, it's not easy. Here we have a group of, you know, potentially neurotypical individuals, and we're not necessarily agreeing on that. And it goes on with these other faces. And these are all categorized as something, one thing. And I know I look at them and go, well, it could be this, or it could be that, or it could be... Let's try something along these lines. This is called the EYES test. And this is a test that I actually use with people. And I want you to take a look at it if it comes up. Oh, all right. There we go. That's the practice. And what you have is you have a pair of eyes, and you have 4 words to choose from. And I'd like you to write down what you think is the appropriate emotion being expressed in those words, in those eyes. Okay. So this is the practice, so we're going to share. So what does everybody think it is? Panicked? Anybody else? Anything else? Don't be shy. Sorry? Hateful. Well, the survey says panicked. So you guys are good. You got that. Yeah. But what about this? Now's the start of the test. Okay? 4 words. What's being illustrated there? Don't talk to your neighbor. Don't look on their paper. Your own answer. Okay, next one. All right, 4 words. What's being expressed there? Make your choice. All right, next one. 4 words. What's being expressed there? Make your choice. Next one. 4 words. What's being expressed there? Make your choice. Next one. 4 words. What's being expressed there? Make your choice. Next one. 4 words. What's being expressed there? Make your choice. Next one. Okay. We could go on. There's a lot of these. The point I want to make with you, and we can go back through them. Number 1, it was playful. Number 2, upset. Number 3, desire. Number 4, insisting. Number 5, worried. And how far did we go? This was number 6, fantasizing. Number 7, uneasy. Okay. Now, I said something along the lines of 4 words, make your choice, next one, and then I went on. That was fast, wasn't it? Yeah, really fast. How fast must you make those decisions in a conversation? A lot faster than that. You don't get 4 words, make your choice, next one, for each instance of what someone is saying to you with their eyes. You get that much time to make that decision. Kids with ASD, if you thought this was difficult, then they think this is impossible. And I don't go through it that quickly with them. I give them as much time as they want to make their choice. And if there's, 36 of these, they have to score less than, I'm going to have these numbers wrong, so nobody write me about this later. I know I'm wrong. It's like less than 26, whereas neurotypical people will make, closer to 33, that sort of thing. They just don't get it. It's with all the time in the world, they don't get it. So when you're talking to them and they appear not to be understanding, it's probably because they don't. Now, what are you going to do about it? Well, again, you need to, first of all, be aware that the communication is problematic for them. You can't just assume they got it, because chances are they may not have. So you check in with them. And you don't say, is that okay? Because they'll say yes. Because as far as they're concerned, well, it's as okay as it ever is. I didn't understand it, but that's okay. You need to specifically check, did they understand what it was that you wanted them to understand? It has to be very literal in how you make that question around what is it that you've got from this, and maybe even comment. But if it's critical, if it's important for their being able to do the subject matter that you're presenting, then make sure they actually got it, because they will know that they didn't. Like some kids will say, oh yeah, no problem. No, they don't care. Maybe. For the kid with ASD, they care. usually care a lot, but they're not getting it, so they kind of give up. It's more a case of learned helplessness. It doesn't work for me, so, you say you get that, and if I say no, you're going to look at me like, well, what do you mean? I said it, it's just that telling you that lunch is coming. So let's go back to our presentation before lunch comes. So that's the I's. Social interaction difficulties. We get these all the time. So-and-so is stalking me. 500 emails a day, that kind of thing. Again, they don't understand. In the peers program, social interaction communication program, we say you can send 2 electronic communications to somebody, text, email, phone call, whatever. If they do not respond after the second one, they do not want to talk to you. That's what it means. It doesn't mean, well, they were busy, or they weren't able to get to you, or they forgot. After the second one, if they do not respond to you, they do not want to talk to you. Move on. And they don't understand that. It has to be that explicit for them. They really will think, well, the person smiled at me, so they must like me. Some of you people are smiling at me. You're probably just trying to not fall asleep. I don't know. But he's laughing. It doesn't mean that, you're my best friend now. For the kid with ASD, that's what it may mean for them, because they don't understand that it's just a social convention and we smile at people and that makes the social wheels go around. Social distance, we talked about. Hygiene can be a really difficult issue. I run into counselors all the time who say, not my problem, I'm not going to deal with that. I don't do hygiene with people. If we don't do the hygiene with them, then they're going to start having social difficulties. The other kids are going to start harassing them, and then you're going to have problems that we have to deal with. So, in the classroom, I don't see that really as being the kind of thing that you guys are going to engage in. But there's got to be somebody in your institution who can say, Frank, you're wearing the same outfit every day. And you may like it, but it's, beginning to have an odor, so you've got to do something about it. Why do they do this? It's all about somatic sensitivity. Temple Grandin, who I mentioned previously, talks about going to secondhand stores and buying used clothing because it's soft enough that she can wear it. Otherwise, new clothes are stiff and hard and they hurt. They literally hurt to wear. The printing of labels in the back of t-shirts was the best thing that has ever happened for people with ASD, because, parents always spend all their time trying to cut labels out and pick the little things out, because it was like razor blades. They're sitting there and they can't sit still, and because this thing is getting to me in the back of my neck. Really hypersensitive. Now, they can also be hyposensitive, which is another issue altogether, and that usually results in the reports of somebody's rubbing their groin area and people think they're masturbating or something. But it's this hyposensitivity where they don't feel, and there's nothing sexual going on there. But it's somebody who doesn't feel. It's just like it's an itch, So that's all they're feeling. So you've got to have somebody who can deal with these kind of issues, and it may not be, or your institution may say it is part of your purview to say, you need to talk to someone about personal hygiene, whatever. Conversation issues, they will interrupt, they will correct you, they will make contributions in class, they take up 90% of your class time, they will ask 50 questions. You need to give them explicit rules about what's okay in class. For one student, it was as simple as saying, in a 50-minute period, if there are 50 students in the class and each one asks a question, how will the professor profess anything, teach anything? How will the instructor instruct? Oh yeah, and if you're the student who asks all of those 50 questions, how are the other people going to get anything at all? And they can do the math. They're not without those capabilities. So sometimes it's as simple as that. Sometimes you have to go to something like the question card or the 2 question cards, depending upon your particular situation. The hidden curriculum, that's all about how to survive in school. And all I can say about the hidden curriculum, which we all kind of know, or after our first week, we know. And I used to say when I was an undergrad, you've got to know the secretaries and the security guards. Those are the people who make the place run. Those are the people who can let you into that building late at night, because you left your book in there, and well, the kid with ASD doesn't understand any of that hidden curriculum. Doesn't even understand the obvious stuff about how to sign up for classes, as I was mentioning earlier. The best way to confront that is with, and I hear that you guys are thinking about or starting some kind of mentoring program where you have students who know what they're doing, able to talk to students about how to make it work. And they're able to say, Professor so-and-so, don't get in her class. If you can avoid it, she's terrible, she doesn't listen to, but, her class, well, she will just, accept anything to pass it in. Go to that one. They'll talk in a way that students can appreciate each other talking, and it can work very well. If you're going to do it for students with ASD, I recommend you have some training of the mentors above and beyond the usual mentor training, that they understand the need for building in boundaries, rules, and usually mentoring programs are not socially oriented. For these kids, you need a mentoring program that will address the social aspect as well. As I mentioned yesterday, a young man told me about how I went to the pub and I bought a beer, and he described to me in detail the label of the beer, and then he said I drank my beer, and then I didn't know what to do, so I went home. That was his night out. You need a mentor to tell them how to have fun at the pub, what to do at the basketball game. Whatever it is that's an activity on campus, that they need that kind of explicit instruction and permission to do these things. Otherwise, they're not going to know what to do. We talked about social distance, social capital. It's a concept that it is a concept, but I change it in how I use it. It's about doing the things that other people do so that they get a good feeling about you. So, I'm going to dress the way the others dress. I'm going to talk about, whichever hockey team they like to talk about. I'm going to, fit in. And that way, it's like you're building your social capital with these people. It's like you're making deposits into an account that builds up over time so that when you do come in and say or do something that they consider incredibly weird or nerdy or whatever, and they catch you with your Pokemon Go in your hand, that kind of thing, that they'll say, well, no, it's okay because Sally, she's really a nice person. That's a little bit of a withdrawal from your social capital account, but you haven't gone into overdraft. You've built this up with people. Abuse and bullying. York University, 2 or 3 years ago now, they did a study of their student body, and maybe others, but I think it was just their own, where they looked at sexual abuse, sexual harassment, those kind of issues on campus. And they looked at it from the point of view of what's happening for neurotypical students, what's happening for students with ASD. They have an autism lab on York campus, which is great. They do all sorts of great things, chair of autism studies, wonderful. Anyway, what they found out was students experiencing autism are almost 2.5 times more likely to be the victim of some kind of sexual abuse. And that cuts across both genders. There's no difference. But they took it further and they asked, okay, how are students getting information about relationships and sexuality. And they asked on 5 different dimensions. Are they getting it from print? Are they getting it from television? Are they getting it from friends? Are they getting it from parents? Are they getting it from the internet? And what they found was that neurotypical students talk to their friends. So it's, gee, I think, that guy, he asked me if I wanted to go to the public thing. And their friend says, oh, that guy? Oh, he's a really nice guy. I've heard people say nice things about him. Or, I don't know, man, some other girls who've gone out with him haven't had good things to say. That's neurotypical friend interaction socially, talking about relationships, and, in effect, talking about sexuality. For the kid with ASD, they don't have friends. So they've got nobody to talk to. Well, they've got their parents. Neurotypical kids don't talk to their parents about these things. So the kid with ASD is not going to talk to their parents. So everybody, guess where they get their information? Of course, the internet, the well-known source of quality information on sexuality and relationships. Why do I keep forgetting her name? There's a wonderful psychologist in Montreal who does a lot of great work with individuals with ASD in relation to sexuality. I want to say Isabel Hebert, but I can't remember, and I apologize for that. But to you and to her, she has recounted some stories of some groups that she's run, where in these groups where they're discussing sexuality and relationship, young men on the spectrum have said things like, do you want a relationship? Well, yeah. And you want sex to be part of that relationship? Oh, yes. So why aren't you going out? You're not meeting anybody. Well, I don't have to, do I? I mean, don't I just wait at home and some woman will come to my door and she'll want to have sex with me? I guess that's how it happens on the internet. I don't know. Other things she's related, stories about the misconception of how people actually look once their clothing is removed. That indeed the only reason women don't have huge breasts in real life is because their bras keep them contained. So they think women have huge breasts. It's a fact. You see it on the internet. They'll argue with her. They'll say, no, we know this because we've seen it. And it goes the other way for men as well. It's not the way to get your information. And she runs a wonderful program, which, let's face it, everybody gets sex. We're not going to deal with that. But she does a wonderful, wonderful program where she dispels these myths for them, shows them pictures of this is what real people look like, talks about how to have real relationships. The Peers for Young Adults program talks about dating, flirting, and relationships. And it's, again, excellent, excellent program. There's also a lady by the name of Gail Hawkins who has put together a video. It's about 55 minutes long. Highly recommend it. It's fun. And it's called Plus One. The storyline is 3 young men with Asperger's who are working together to do a film on zombies. And they get an invitation from a friend who's getting married. And they're invited to the wedding. It's in a week's time, and it's a +1 invitation. So it's, and hilarity ensues as they go out and try and find their +1. Now, these are all individuals on the spectrum who write and act in this movie, and it's just really well done. It's free. I'd say organize some kind of event, have this movie, make it part of your autism awareness. It's really quite good. They also then promote, not in the movie, but Gail promotes a program that she has online, which is on social understanding and communication, which is also very, very well done. Smart, funny, good production values, and they sell that one. I think it's like 30, 70 bucks, I don't know what it is. And you get them like 3 or 4 months access to it, something like that. And online, which is unfortunate. I saw it, they did a theatrical release for it at U of T, where they rented a room, something like this, and they had it on the big screen, and they did it like an Academy Award thing, and they had all the actors there, you know, it was lots of fun. On the tiny screen, it's not quite as good on your computer, but maybe you can project it like this. And I would, again, recommend that as one of those ways of dealing with, coming back to this issue of abuse and bullying. The individual with ASD doesn't necessarily understand what they've said, like about your scarf, is something hurtful. One example that I ran into when I was doing my sabbatical search, a young lady who had never encountered persons of color. She came from a part of the country where they just weren't around. And she came to the big city and, you know, in a residence, and she was rooming with a person of color, and she, you know, said, wow, I never, you know, expected you to, you know, be the way you are, because her experience had been all, you know, the worst kind of stereotypical Hollywood images of, you know, people who were, you know, criminals and hookers and, you know, stuff like that on these bad TV shows. And she said this to this young lady who really took offense, like, how dare you, you know, tell me you think I'm so much better than you expected. And so much so that she ended up with her friends inviting this girl out to go drinking, and then when the girl went to the washroom, they burst in and took pictures of her and put them on the internet to teach this kid. They weren't going to take that kind of stuff from her. You know, I mean, it wasn't right for the students to do that in retaliation, but students will do that kind of thing when they think they've been wronged in some way, and the individual with ASD has no idea that they wronged somebody by telling them, gee, I think you're a really nice person. I wasn't expecting that. You know, I thought, you know, and just sad. How do you get around that? Friends are a protective factor. That's, you know, mentors can help a little, but a mentor can't be your friend. Friends, true friends, people with whom you share interests are a protective factor. And anything that can be done in your institution to help to encourage that is to be encouraged. Social developmental level. I told you I'd talk about this, and it's hugely important. How many of you have 12-year-olds in your classes? No, right? I mean, if there was some kid who, for whatever reason, was really bright, and they said, you know, you don't have to go to high school, you can come right into the program of your choice, we might end up with a 12-year-old in one of your classes. It's possible. But you'd look at them and you'd know you're a 12-year-old, and everybody else would know they're a 12-year-old, and we would treat them accordingly. You know, people would look out for them, they'd, you know, make allowances for them, they'd make sure that, you know, they weren't taken advantage of or bullied in any way. Well, there are a lot of people on the spectrum who, generally speaking, and this is not a scientific, but this is a kind of an accepted value, that they're about 5 years or more behind in their social emotional development. So if you've got a 17-year-old in your class or an 18-year-old in your class, you're talking about a 12 or 13-year-old in terms of social emotional development. You wouldn't let that 12 or 13-year-old loose without some kind of sort of protective sort of, you know, attitude toward them if they were actually 12 or 13. But you've got the equivalent of that in a 17 or 18-year-old body. They're the same socially, emotionally as that 12 or 13-year-old. And we let them loose, and we expect them to fend for themselves. It doesn't work. So we end up with all those kinds of issues that we've been talking about, whether it's the stalking issue, whether it's the not knowing how to
address people properly. And it's worse than the neurotypical 12 or 13-year-old because they have the communication difficulties and the lack of social understanding on top of that. So you've got to put in supports for that student, or they won't be successful, because how could they be? We wouldn't expect the real 12 or 13-year-old to be successful without any of the communication or social understanding issues. But now we've got the 12 or 13-year-old socially, emotionally, with the communication and social understanding issues, and we expect them to be successful on their own. It's not going to work. We need the supports, we need the mentors, we need the social and communication training programs. We need to step back and realize I've got to be really careful in how I communicate, and I've got to check and make sure. And they have these executive function difficulties where they have an appointment scheduled or a test they're supposed to write. Oh, one young lady, she came in tears to my office. She said, my class is on Mondays. And the test was booked for, pick a date, December 10th. And I knew the class is always on Monday. So I came on Monday for the test, but December 10th was the Friday. And I didn't know that they would change the test to a day other than the class day. And so I missed my exam. I'm going to fail. So those kind of executive function and understanding issues, we all kind of take them for granted. Although we had our issues, we were trying to get here on time yesterday. But that could be me, and probably is. It's that hour difference, with Ontario. I'm saying that anyway. It's my excuse. You've got to check on those things. Okay, theory of mind. Said we talk about that. Theory of mind and context. Does anybody recognize what this is? Sorry? It's an anchovy pizza. Yes, it's an anchovy. Who likes anchovy pizza? Hands, please. We got 2 of you. Yesterday we had 2 of you. You'll know that you're not alone, but it's lonely. Okay, so you like anchovy pizza because it tastes good, right? Yeah. It's not because it looks good, because it looks like some kind of a sea creature or something. I don't know. Well, it is a sea creature, isn't it? But, and it tastes good. And I'll bet that you kind of harbor this feeling of, and you guys, if you would only give it a chance, you'd know how good it tastes as well. Is that a little bit of that? Yeah, a little bit, yeah. Well, it doesn't taste good. It's awful. Really. No. But that's your belief about this. For the person with ASD, what they know is what they know. And it goes further than that. I told you how difficult it can be to unlearn things. It goes further than that, in that what they know, they think you know. So, if they like anchovy pizza, then you must really like it too. And in fact, if you say you don't like it, they don't understand that. Why are you doing that? Because you know you really do like it. It's good. Everybody likes anchovy pizza. It is. No, really. But they just don't get how somebody else has a different perception of that same thing that they know. Now, when we're talking about couples counseling, not with ASD, just couples, we talk about this being magical thinking. Well, my husband should know that when he does such and such, so that makes me feel, well, how should he know that? Have you ever told him? Well, no, but he should know that. Yeah, he's laughing over there. Yeah. He's heard this one before. It is magical thinking. And neurotypical people can understand, oh, well, yeah, if I haven't told them, then probably they don't know. It can be so bad. I'll give you the example I gave yesterday. Let's suppose I had a bag of things here and a bag of things here, and they're kind of lumpy things, and the picture on that bag is of rocks. And the picture on that bag is identical. It's of rocks. So I come in and I ask you, what do you think is in this bag with the picture of rocks on it? They're lumpy. So we open it up, rocks. Okay. Then I say, what do you think is in this bag that looks identically lumpy and has a picture of rocks on it? And I open it up, marbles. Okay, close it up. Now, your friend here has been outside. If we bring her in and ask her, what's in this bag, what's she going to say? Of course, she's going to say rocks. She's got a picture of rocks on it. For someone with a severe issue of theory of mind, they'd say marbles. Because you now know there are marbles in there, so therefore, your friend who has no knowledge of this whatsoever, when she comes in from outside, should know that there are marbles in there. That's a severe issue with theory of mind. And one of the young ladies that I've worked with, absolutely brilliant young woman. I should have looked that up. What is it when someone studies language? I'm not a linguist. It's like entomology, but that's insects. I can't remember. Anyway, that's what she does, and she's brilliant. I gave her this theory of mind test, which is for 16-year-olds. That's where it tops out. That's how it's been normed on from 1 to 16. So you would think a 24-year-old is going to do better than a 16-year-old. She scored less than the second percentile. You can't measure below where she scored on theory of mind. Incredibly bright individual. She talked about how when she enters a social situation, she has this like Rolodex of checklists in her mind. And she goes through each one really quickly, checking off what's in this situation, what's in this situation, what's in this situation, until she finds a checklist that matches the situation, and then she knows how to act. That's how she functions socially. And the only time it breaks down is when she encounters a situation that doesn't fit the checklist that she has. And then it breaks down, and she doesn't know what to do. She's lost. Now, I've got to say, after our sessions, I'm really gratified to hear from her that she contacted me and told me that she'd gone to a conference and her luggage got lost. And she said, I was able to go to the counter and fill out my luggage claim form and get my money for stuff so I could have things for the conference, and I didn't even cry. And she was so proud of herself. And you had to feel for her as well, that it was such an experience for her to be able to do that. There was no checklist for that one. That was a new one for her to encounter. Yes?
Is that the word, I think? Etymologist? E-T-Y-M-O-L-O-G-I-S.
I think that's it, yeah. I'm not even going to try. But in any case, that's the difficulty with theory of mind. What I know, I think you know, so if you do something else, you're just being nasty. You're deliberately being nasty. Why would you do that? You're a nasty instructor because you know what I know, and I know this, and if you do something else, then you must not like me. What's wrong? So theory of mind can be a really debilitating issue. Now, people have this in various degrees, people with ASD. Some people don't seem to have the difficulty at all, but it is highly prevalent in the population. Now, problems with context. Context is knowing what's appropriate to say or do in the right situation. Kind of like my client who's going through the checklist to find out how she should act in a particular situation. When does context when does it raise its ugly head? You teach someone with ASD that, when they meet somebody, they come up and say, hi, how are you? It's really good to see you. Are you having a good time? Which works unless you're at a funeral. So, that's context issues. They don't know the correct behavior to use in the correct situation. And that can happen in a classroom. They don't know that in a classroom it's not appropriate to go, hi George, how are you? I see you back there, because it's the context is changed. They don't know that it's not appropriate to when they're feeling, a difficulty with, their gastrointestinal environment or something, to say, that's not appropriate when you're sitting in class. Those are difficulties with context. Now, what can you do about that? You let them know explicitly. You give them written instructions about, this is, in the early grades, they sit down and they say, we're going to make up rules for our classroom, and we're going to post them on the board. When we run our Peers for Young Adults sessions, we do 16 weeks, an hour and a half a week, we sit there and we make up rules, and we post them on the board as to how we're going to act in our session. Because if we don't, we'll be putting out little fires every 5 minutes because somebody thinks it's okay to do whatever. We also removed all the swiveling chairs, and we were providing plastic water bottles. And I don't mean that kind. I mean that kind. You know how they, when you crinkle. Yeah. So we don't do that anymore either. It's a matter of, unless you want to spend all your time doing classroom management, putting out fires, think about what are some of the kind of things that really annoy you, but they're tiny little things, and set up some rules about that so that they're no longer going to happen. Now, you may have administrative difficulties. They may say, no, you can't do that, whatever. I don't know. But if that is within your purview, if you're allowed to have some control over some of those kinds of things, it might be worth looking at what makes sense. Now, you don't want to become, sort of the Hun, whatever, but you do want to make sure that you take care of some of the small things that are easy to take care of. Difficulties with communication, social direction, perceptions, theory of mind, these are all things that can help with those. And I would invite you to investigate all of them. You're going to have these in your handouts. And Rick Lavoie, that's kind of a handout for parents, but it makes sense for instructors as well around communication. The micro-expression trainer, not something I expect you to do in class, but this is literally an app for teaching people to understand what's it mean when somebody goes, that kind of thing. The peers group, talked about that. Social groups, haven't talked about this one, but it's important. You don't learn socialization if you're not socializing. So it's really important to have social groups for kids with ASD so they can actually bump up against other individuals and learn about how to socialize in a natural way, not in a, like the peers group is an instruction way. So it's also the kind of thing where, as some of the students have put it to me, it's nice to be in a group where other people don't get freaked out when you have to pace back and forth, because that's what happens. They do these kinds of things. And other students on the spectrum are going to understand. You just had to pace. It's not a big deal. One of the guys at U of T, Jason, he's also one of my colleagues at Redpath. He works at Redpath part-time. He talks about the social group that he was running and how at one point he missed a session. So what did they do for that session? Well, they decided that they would make a graph of Jason's interactions with the different members of the group to determine whether or not he had a preference for either gender or specific individuals. So that's what they did during that session when he wasn't there. The FriendMaker app, highly recommended. It's an app, and it's made by the same people who've done the Peers program. It's 99 cents, so they're not making anything off of this. And Liz Langeson, who's the professor at UCLA, who has done the Peers for Young Adults program, she's put all of the behavioral interactions that they act out for the Peers program into this app so that people can look at it, review it, and use it for practice. So, how do you respond when someone's teasing you? Well, we tell people, ignore them, walk away, tell a professor, an instructor, somebody. Those are just so wrong. That paints a big circle on their back target. And the Peers program teaches things, and the FriendMaker app shows these things, like how to do a shoulder shrug, like I could care less. Man, that was lame. The last thing any young adult wants to think they're being is lame. So if you can teach how to act so that the person who is teasing you appears to be doing something lame, it kills it right away. Because they don't want to be lame. So you teach a shoulder shrug, you teach an eye roll, you teach a response like, whatever. So, and not a, I'm going to ignore you. That doesn't work. Mind reading software program is a little more expensive. It's something that is very, very it goes into great depth. But last I saw, it's like about 89 pounds, and even with Britain teetering on the edge of Europe now, their pound is down, but that's still like $150, $160, something like that, I think. And one of the actors in that you'll recognize is a very, very young Daniel Radcliffe. So you Harry Potter fans would run right out and buy that. And I mentioned already the +1 from the Hawkins Institute. Now this is where we ended for the administrators yesterday, but we don't end there for you guys, because you guys do more. And we're going to talk about the executive function difficulties that these kind of students experience. Now, I've talked to it a little bit already. Any of you familiar with the series Mad Men? It was on, I guess, AMC or something, HBO, I don't know where it was. But it talked about a time in history where we had primarily men in their executive office with an executive secretary sitting outside the office. And you've seen the movies, you've seen that kind of thing. And the executive secretary is kind of like in charge. They vet everybody who wants to come into the office and decide whether or not they're important enough that the boss needs to see them. They take the phone calls and decide should they be, transferred to the boss. They look in the calendar, they tell the boss, it's your wife's birthday tomorrow, do you want me to go out and pick up the present, They take care of all of the details, the memory, everything. That's what executive function is. It's that part right up here in your prefrontal that takes care of all that stuff for you. And for the kid with ASD, usually the executive secretary is on permanent vacation. And the boss is sitting there in the office going, I wonder what I should do today. Oh, the phone's ringing, should I get that? But there's this paper on my desk, should I do that? And somebody wants to come in and see me. Should I see them for 5 minutes or an hour? Or maybe I should just go to lunch. That's the problem. The executive secretary is on vacation. And they don't know how to prioritize. They don't remember that it's their wife's birthday tomorrow. Which is why I have wives bringing their sons meetings to get assessed all the time. It's a huge, huge difficulty for them. Now, I've got this thing down here that says my student. And if I had my notes, I'd know what that means. But it's not coming back to me. I didn't do this part yesterday, so I don't have that memory boost on this. So we're going to leave my student, because it doesn't ring any bells right at the moment as to what I wanted to tell you. And we're going to go to the time perception difficulties, also part of the executive function, in my opinion. Time for the individual with ASD is now and not now. That's time. You might appreciate how that makes it difficult to plan in advance. Because there's only now and not now. So if it's test on Tuesday and a test on Thursday and an assignment due on Friday, that's all not now. Extremely difficult. That's where the learning strategies comes in. I hope, I don't know how you guys operate, but that's, in my experience, institutions I've been in, that's where the learning strategies comes in, and it's not easy. Because this is not just a matter of sitting down once with a learning strategist and going through your calendar and marking things in. This is constant, weekly, at least, support on where are you at with these items. Because it gets even more insidious than that. They're doing an essay. And you'll say, how are you doing with that essay? Oh, it's coming along very well. Really? Okay, well, how much time have you spent on it? Well, I've spent the last 3 days on it, and I think I've got my thesis statement. Yeah, it's like, and it's due when? Well, next week. And it's Friday? So, and they have been. They've been working their tails off on 5% of the assignment and doing a great job. But they're never going to finish it because they didn't plan their time and utilize it in an effective manner. Because they don't understand that, well, you wanted me to do it well, so I should really take the time it needs to do this. And that's one of the hardest issues is just do good enough. It doesn't have to be right, just do good enough. And boy, you can get some real reactions to that. So a big issue for somebody to try and work with them around being able to prioritize what they're doing for you in the classroom. And it doesn't hurt for you to be reminding them in writing, not just verbally, because they may not even get that. I need you to be on this part of this assignment for tomorrow. I need you to be on this part of this assignment for tomorrow. That's what you say the next day. You change the part of the assignment. Because if you say, I need you to be on this part of the assignment tomorrow and the next day on this part, a lot of them aren't going to make the distinction between when is this part and this part. Just they know one comes before the other, but it's all not now. So, time perception difficulties. At least 2% of the general population have these kinds of difficulties. And very often it involves the inability to control impulsivity. And the classic, we do this in my family all the time is, like, oh, and you want me to say, oh, a squirrel. Or, yes, and I would tell you, butterfly. That's the running joke in my family. But it's anything in the environment can be responded to impulsively, regardless of its importance. So, it's very difficult. Also, we're talking about cognitive flexibility and switching, and this can be hugely difficult for the individual with ASD. Now, how do we illustrate cognitive flexibility and switching? Well, we're going to do that, so that'll be easy. It affects inhibition, working memory, these executive function difficulties, planning, self-monitoring, verbal regulation, motor control, maintaining and changing mental set, and emotional regulation. All these things are affected by issues with executive function. And they all are controlled by that executive secretary who's on vacation. So let's do it.
We're about 15 minutes old.
If you will bear with me, this is short. We'll do this one, then we'll go eat. Okay? The following screen is some words that are in colored text. Quickly say the color of the word out loud. So I want you to be loud. Not like the girls who can't project. I want you to project and do not read the word. Are you ready? Go, go, go. Go, 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 go. Faster. Come on, guys. This is just words. You can do this. You can read words. Read these words. Faster, faster. Go, go, go. Are you having fun yet? test from the 1930s called the Stroop test. And it illustrates the issue that people have with being able to change from something which is well learned, that we do all the time, which is when you see a word, you read it. You don't say the color of the ink it's printed in. And that's the kind of mental flexibility and switching difficulty that the kids with ASD run into. You've just had a very, very tiny experience of that, and I see some of you struggled with it. It wasn't easy to do. They struggle with that all the time. That's the kind of struggle they have when you say, we're changing the date of the test. It's the struggle when we're switching classrooms. We're having a surprise lecturer today, somebody's coming in. All those kind of things, just throw them so that they're stuck. How many of you got stuck? Anybody? Yes. Yes. They get stuck. And they can't move. Somebody near and dear to me was trying to sign up for courses recently, and they were running into a problem with the system. And the system was saying, you don't have the prerequisite for that course. And the individual is saying, but I took that course last year and I passed it. I just want to take it again so I can get a better mark. Well, the system says, we've changed the prerequisites for that course and you can't take it because you don't have the prerequisite for that course. And the person became stuck, and they had to, of course, talk to some people, get out of the system. Every time they talked to a person, it was like, well, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I'm not really the person who could handle that. You'll need to speak to so-and-so, and they're on vacation. So you're going to have to wait until, while they're waiting, the rest of us would go about our lives. The person with ASD can't think about anything else. They're stuck. They can't go on and do other productive things. So that's how bad it can be for them when things change and don't work logically and well. Anyway, that's lunchtime, I guess. So you can go and practice your words in different colors.
Thank you very much.
After lunch, right?
No, it's another group this afternoon. It's
Oh,
parents.
no.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
parents this afternoon.
Oh, I had so much more. Oh, okay, well,
But I was going to add to that, Kevin, you have shared such a
okay.